Welcome to Prepper Health Saturday. Today we're going to talk about gluten, and this would be a gluten awareness type of talk. And what we're going to talk here is about what is gluten and the symptoms of gluten, and why should we be concerned. So first of all, what is gluten? Gluten is going to be a type of protein, and this particular protein is very hard to digest. Overall, though, it's a protein found mainly in wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. And there's a large part of the population, though, that has either, they call it different things, a sensitivity, intolerance, or an allergy. The allergy is called celiac disease. It says, typically the studies have shown only about 5 to 10% of the population has been diagnosed with this or a related disorder or disease. So there's massive underdiagnosis for this problem. Now, in terms of the intolerance of gluten, the official stat numbers show that it's between 2 to 3% of the population. There's many more, though, that say that it's much, much higher. In fact, they're all over the map. But it seems to be that it's probably over 20% for sure. There's definitely even doctors that say that because a lot of these symptoms, though, are not even ever seen, people don't even have symptomology, and that they're really hard to detect unless you have like a blood test or an allergy test, that, on the full spectrum of the continuum, that it could be as high as around 80 to 85% of the population has some form of sensitivity or intolerance to gluten, which is it's like an epidemic. It's amazing. There's a lot of people and groups, especially health advocates, nutritionists and doctors that specialize in nutrition. They don't even consider wheat a food. And if you got to think about it, though, it was only introduced into the food chain really in the mid-kingdom of the Egyptian times, when they found that basically the wheat grew in a larger harvest and abundance than what they were previously using. And so yeah, it's controversial. I know for myself and my family, we have some different levels of intolerance. Some people can get deathly ill if they have any. And then someone like myself, I just get some indigestion problems when I have some gluten. So I'm gluten-free personally. Now, so it's a big range. It's kind of like there's not enough research really to know what percent of the population really has all these problems. But it's just good for you to know, because you may not even know, have no symptoms, as I said, and so you may be suffering and you don't even know it. So what are some of the other main symptoms that are more outward that you would definitely know, or at least probably be suspicious of if you have? So these are the list here. This is by no means inclusive. I'm just trying to cherry pick off the top because there's so many problems with gluten. First is hyperthyroidism. Next one is back pain, chronic fatigue, skin disorders like dermatitis, acne, thinking problems like foggy thinking, osteoporosis, anemia, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis. We got depression, cancers, asthma, some various autoimmune disorders, even though there's a lot of holistic doctors that say that there really is no such thing as an autoimmune disorder, that it all falls under inflammation of the body. But let's just go ahead and stick with the mainstream term and say autoimmune system disorders, and such as lupus, neurological and psychiatric conditions, such as we were talking about before, like depression and other types of mental issues, liver disease. And this is the big one. This is the one that the nutritionists really point out. It happens in the gut because the gluten is so almost impossible to digest. And for some people, it's just totally not digestible. It actually kind of gums up the gut, especially in the large intestines and sometimes even the small intestines. And all those uptake sensors and points that bring in the nutrition into the body, basically it damages the gut wall and reduces that absorption of the nutrients to get in there. The main ones that it really blocks, and this is by far not inclusive either for the whole list, but iron, calcium, and vitamin D are some of the bigger ones that totally blocks out. But it's not unheard of to block out pretty much most nutrients depending on the amount of gluten and your sensitivity. So it allows you to become nutrient deficient really quick, within a matter of days or weeks. If you go right into a full-on gluten diet that you didn't, previously have, you could have some major problems if you have any kind of sensitivity, intolerance, or allergen to this. So what can you do about this? Well, first of all, if you just want to see if you have any outward symptoms and you wanted to just compare how you feel now, compare how you would feel if you didn't have any gluten, just to make sure that you haven't just gotten used to it and created some kind of normalcy bias in terms of how you feel. Because sometimes you just get used to feeling bad and don't even know you're feeling bad, believe it or not. What you can do is the 2-week test. 2 weeks, you go with no gluten at all. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, you have something with gluten and you see if you have any reaction. And you'll know it. You'll feel real funky or you'll get sick. And that's one way. Now, like I said, most people don't even have symptoms. So you probably have to have some kind of allergy test or a blood test to really even know that for sure if you have it. But so this is just some information here about gluten. I hope this helped in some way. Just remember, though, for most people, though, it's just not something that you really want to consume. I know people really get into their breads and their pastries and other things, but let me just tell you, though, in the long run, there's a lot of other studies, though, that really clearly point toward, and this kind of falls under the neurological and psychiatric ones, but disorders. It really points toward Alzheimer's, because it actually it really has a lot of problems with promoting plaque in the brain. And overall, man, this gluten stuff really isn't good. Even if you don't have any kind of allergy to it, it doesn't help you at all. It doesn't give you any real benefit. People say, well, there's protein and there's also carbs that our body can use. And if you don't have a problem with it, why not eat it? Well, because I think I'm one of those people also that believe that it probably is not a real food. It's something that some people can tolerate, but that doesn't mean that, you should probably be eating a lot of it or any of it. So just remember, wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. It's not that big of a deal to cut those out. All this talk about, but you got to have your oatmeal to get that cholesterol down. That's another myth too. There's no connection anywhere between cholesterol and heart disease. That's a complete myth. And if you just look into a little bit, you'll find you can debunk that in a heartbeat. There's all kind of lobbyists in bed with the FDA, and there's all kind of corruption. So what causes heart disease is inflammation. It's vascular inflammation. And that comes from things like, processed oils that oxidize and they become inflammatory in your body. And they break down the walls of your veins and your arteries. And because they do that, the plaque has an opportunity, if you will, to attach to the wall, and the plaque builds and you have a congested or a blockage and you could die. So one thing you can do to counter that is obviously eat green leafy vegetables. To counter that, to rebuild up the walls and of the arteries in particular, and stop eating processed stuff, and especially get rid of that oils, and don't overcook your foods, especially your meats at all. You try to do them as the least amount possible in terms of cooking. And basically, you need the fats and you need the cholesterols. I mean, what do you think our brains are made of? The cells actually communicate with each other through cholesterol. And yes, our body makes some cholesterol. Sometimes it needs more. And so this is just a little primer about health and gluten and some other things. And I hope you learned something, at least a little bit. If you have anything you want to add to this, or if this is in your specialty, or if this is a hobby of yours, then feel free to comment. I would love to hear your viewpoint. Everything I said has been thoroughly researched over decades. And I actually practice these practices. I don't do gluten, and also I'm very careful about what I eat, and I hope you are too. You guys be careful.